Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into a project that's at a super interesting and maybe even a critical point in its journey. I'm talking about the Linux Foundation's Nephio project. As it gets ready for its fourth major release, R4, the whole community is kind of standing at a crossroads. And the conversations happening are about so much more than just, what features to add next. We're talking about really fundamental questions about its architecture, its internal processes, and heck, even its own identity. Is the next step just a simple evolution of what they've already built? Or does it need a more radical, a more revolutionary change to actually meet what users are asking for? Or, as some folks inside the community are saying out loud, is the project facing a real crisis? We're going to unpack all of it, and we'll use the words of the project's own leaders to guide us through the story.
So, here's our game plan for unpacking the whole state of Nephio. We're going to start at the very beginning, with its core promise. What was it designed to do? From there, we'll look at the tangible evolutionary steps planned for the R4 roadmap. Then, things get spicy. We'll dive into the deeper, more revolutionary debates, take a look inside the project's engine room, the people and processes, and explore why the community is at this difficult crossroads. And we'll wrap it all up by looking at the big, unanswered questions that will define its future. Let's get right into it. All right, so, Section 1, the core architectural promise. Before we can even get into the debates, the roadmap, or any talk of a crisis, we have to build our foundation. We have to be on the same page about what Nephio even is. What's the grand vision here? This is the anchor for our whole conversation, really defining where Nephio is supposed to fit in the incredibly complex world of Telco. Now, one of the main criticisms you might hear about Nephio is that it's a little unfocused. But this quote from Siglid Sana pushes back on that idea hard. She's saying, nope, the vision is crystal clear. So let's make sure we have that same strong understanding she's talking about. What is the fundamental core problem that Nephio was created to solve in the first place? Okay, at its heart, you can think of Nephio as a kind of universal translator for telco networks. It was designed to sit right in the middle and bridge this massive gap. You've got the northbound systems up top. This is where business needs and high-level instructions are defined. You can think of it as the what we want layer. And then you have the southbound world down below. This is the messy reality of multi-cloud infrastructure, the actual servers and networks where the work gets done. For decades, connecting these two worlds has been a complex, manual, and error-prone process. Nephio's whole goal, its reason for being, is to automate that connection. It takes the what from the business side and automatically translates it into the technical how for all that complex infrastructure.
So the secret sauce, the magic that makes this translation happen, is this idea of declarative deployment. It's a real game changer. Instead of writing a giant step-by-step instruction manual for the system, do this, then do that, then check this, you just declare the final state you want. You describe the desired end result. It's like telling a taxi driver, take me to the airport, not giving them turn-by-turn directions. Nephio's grand promise is to apply this single unified declarative model to 3 totally distinct and usually separate layers, all at the same time. The underlying cloud infrastructure, like your Kubernetes clusters, the incredibly complex network function configurations, and the network functions themselves. Getting these 3 things to work together seamlessly from a single point of control, well, that's been the holy grail of network automation for a very long time.
Okay, so we've established that big, beautiful, grand vision. Now let's start our first spiral outwards and bring things back down to earth. Let's get concrete. We're moving from that architectural promise to the practical, day-to-day reality of the R4 release. What is the community actually building right now? This part is all about the evolutionary, the incremental steps. This is the tangible work that's supposed to move the project forward, one release at a time. And right away, we see this really subtle but super important tension at the very start of the R4 discussion. Here, you have Siglid Bala kicking things off by projecting stability. He says, I don't think there is any huge difference in the R4 plan. But then, almost in the same breath, he qualifies it. He mentions that major proofs of concept are being planned around changing the core of Nephio. This perfectly captures that classic project dilemma, right? You want to reassure your community that the ship is steady while at the same time acknowledging that, yeah, we might actually need to do some foundational, maybe even scary, changes under the hood.
So what does that tension look like in practice for R4? the official scope is really telling. What's in? A major user story around ORAN, and finally finishing the full set of CRUD operations, specifically decommissioning or deleting things. Now, what's explicitly out is just as interesting. No new workloads. The team is making a deliberate choice to prioritize making the core stronger and more robust over just adding a broader set of features. They're choosing depth over breadth. And then you see that one item hanging over everything. Pending, the investigation into replacing KPT, which is a core, fundamental piece of the whole system. More on that in a bit. So a huge goal for R4 is to really tackle ORAN, this massive industry initiative to open up the radio access network. Apparently, they struggled a bit in R3 to marry the two worlds, but the R4 plan is way more concrete. The idea is to use ORAN's intent-driven models as the northbound input, that what we want layer we talked about, and feed that directly into Nephio. Nephio will then act as the engine that translates those high-level ORAN intents into actual provisioned cloud infrastructure. This is the perfect example of Nephio's goal. It's not trying to replace ORAN, but to realize its vision in a modern cloud-native way. It wants to be the automation engine that makes ORAN's promises a reality. Now, the second big focus for R4 sounds really simple, maybe even a little boring, but I promise you it's absolutely critical. Automating the delete operation. See, while Nephio is pretty good at creating resources, taking them away cleanly, decommissioning them, is still a messy manual process. And as Bala says, it doesn't feel very authentic. For any system that wants to be considered production-ready, you have to have a clean, automated, and reliable way to delete things. It's non-negotiable. It might be less flashy than a brand new feature, but tackling this is a huge sign of project maturity. It's about building a trustworthy platform. Okay, so now we spiral further out. We've seen the planned, careful evolution for R4. Now we get to the deeper, more turbulent waters, the big debates about a potential revolution. This is where we go beyond the official scope and look at the really tough foundational questions being asked about Nephio's core technology, its tooling, and its place in the wider ecosystem. This is where the real drama is, and it's where the long-term future of the entire project is being forged. And that brings us to the absolute central technological question hanging over R4 and really the whole project. Is KPT the future? Now, as Bala said earlier, KPT is a fundamental architectural piece of Nephio as it exists today. It's a tool from Google for managing Kubernetes configuration data, and Nephio has built its special sauce, its core logic, all around it. But he also says, very openly, that they are running POCs, proofs of concept, to explore alternatives. They're asking, should we continue with KPT or do something else? I mean, that is a profound question. Changing a core component like this isn't a small tweak. It's like trying to swap out the engine of a car while it's driving down the highway. It has massive, massive implications. Now, Bala feels pretty confident that a change won't actually happen in the R4 release cycle. But the very fact that this investigation is a major official work item, that signals huge uncertainty about the long-term path. The community is actively questioning if the very foundation they built on is the right one for the future. Wow. This quote from Tal is incredibly telling. He's talking about that whole integration story we saw on the architecture slide, how Nephio connects north to orchestrators, south to infrastructure, and east-west to other tools. And listen to what he says. He says they've been talking about it for a while, but R4 is the first release where they're going to actually see something in that regard. And his reason why is so simple but so powerful. Because it's time. That phrase, it's time, it suggests a major shift in the project's priorities. It implies that for the first 3 releases, the focus was all internal, building Nephio's own logic, its own capabilities, but now that focus is pivoting outwards. The project has hit a point where it can't live in a vacuum anymore. To succeed, to get adopted, it has to play nice with the rest of the automation ecosystem. Its time is a strategic admission that integration isn't just a nice-to-have feature anymore. It's a critical necessity for survival. So what does taking integration seriously actually look like in practice? Well, it means moving away from a single, rigid, prescribed toolchain and towards a much more flexible, integration-first mindset. The key theme here, as Bala points out, is becoming GitOps agnostic.
See, right now, Nephio kind of pushes you towards using Google's config sync. But the reality is, big enterprises and service providers have already invested years and millions of dollars into their own tools like Argo CD and Flux. You can't just walk in and tell them to throw all that away. So by becoming tool-agnostic, Nephio can slide into these existing environments much more easily, which dramatically lowers the barrier to adoption. It's about making it easy for people to say yes to Nephio.
All right, let's take our next spiral outwards. We've dug into the architecture and the big technology debates, but how does all this stuff actually get built? This section is about the engine room, the human systems, the development processes, the community culture. The way a community works has a huge impact on the software it produces. And in Nephio's case, it's pretty clear there are some significant points of friction and a lot of discussion.
Tao gives a really honest and candid look at their 6-month release cycle, and it reveals a major challenge in their process. It's this weird hybrid model. It kicks off with a couple of months of slow, careful, waterfall-style planning. But then that gets handed off and collides with a super crunched 3-month, painful, agile development sprint to the finish line. This mixed-up model creates this intense, high-pressure crunch at the end of every single cycle. And it sounds like the community is actively talking about how to fix this, but for now, it's a big source of friction and probably a recipe for burnout.
But here's the interesting flip side. This is the formal life cycle that shows how an idea actually becomes code. And even though the timing of the release cycle is what Tel called painful, the governance process itself is actually very methodical, very structured and well-defined. An idea gets brainstormed, it has to be matured into a formal RX scope template, it has to get community agreement, and then it gets handed off for execution. The key takeaway here is that this is a hallmark of a mature open source project. They have their process down, even if the schedule is still causing them some headaches. And this brings us to our final, widest, and frankly most dramatic spiral. We've talked about the what, the how, and the who. Now we get to the really big question, why? Why does any of this matter? This section dives headfirst into the project's existential questions about its very identity and its future. And these questions were sparked by some incredibly direct, incredibly blunt feedback from inside the community itself. This is where we really get to the heart of that word crisis. Here it is. This is the core debate, and it's framed perfectly by a comment from Kieran, a community member. What is Nephio's #1 goal right now? Is it success measured by thought leadership, its ability to influence the industry, to create new ways of thinking, to get people excited about its ideas? Or is it time to pivot hard towards production readiness, focusing on stability, performance, bug fixes, and all the boring but essential tooling that's required before someone can actually integrate this into a real-world product? In the long run, of course, a project needs both. But right now, at this moment in time, it's a question of priority. It's a question of focus. Where do you put your limited time and energy? The answer to this question is going to define the entire character of R4 and everything that comes after. And then Tal just drops this bomb. He takes Kieran's philosophical question and he gives it a name, a crisis. Now let's break this quote down because it's so important. He's not being melodramatic here. He's laying out a very real and deep tension. He's saying, look, on one hand, we've absolutely proved ourselves as thought leaders. The ideas are powerful, the industry is interested, people want the solution that Nephio is promising. But then he asks this devastatingly simple and brutal follow-up question. Do we have the foundations right? Can the actual code, the technology we've built, support the weight of this grand vision? Is it actually ready for production? This stark admission of a crisis just perfectly captures this huge gap that's opened up between the project's success as an idea and its perceived readiness for prime time. It's a moment of real self-awareness, acknowledging that a great idea isn't enough. The implementation has to be great too. And if Tao's quote was the warning shot, this is the direct hit. This quote, which is relaying feedback from Wim, a key stakeholder, is the piercing no that gives a name to the crisis. Think about those words. The assessment that Nephio was a non-starter and that this major potential user had to start from scratch, that's so much more than a bug report. That's a fundamental rejection of the current implementation for a real-world use case. This one piece of feedback completely changes the game. It injects a massive sense of urgency into the debate, and it becomes the single most powerful argument for a revolution.
And this slide just lays it all out, side by side. These are the two opposing camps in this debate. This is the central dilemma facing the entire community. On the left, you've got the evolution camp. Their argument is captured perfectly by another speaker who says the basic software architecture is quite sound. They point to the huge amount of work, thought, and effort that's already gone into 3 full releases. Their plea, which was summarized by another community member, is basically don't boil the ocean. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's find the weak spots and fix them. But on the right, you have the revolution camp, and they're armed with whim's piercing no. Their view is that the current approach is a non-starter, and the only real path forward is to go and build something completely different. This is the fundamental choice. Do you honor the investment and progress you've made and try to evolve the current platform? Or do you listen to that stark feedback and risk a radical, revolutionary change in direction?
So after all that, where does this leave us? We've journeyed all the way from the clean core architecture, through the roadmap, through the deep debates, and right into a very real crisis of identity facing this project. Our deep dive has uncovered a whole series of critical strategic tensions. So this final section, it isn't about me giving you the answers. It's about clearly framing the key questions that the Nephio community now has to answer for itself as it tries to move forward. So let's just quickly recap the major unresolved issues that are going to shape Nephio's future. First, there's process. Waterfall versus true agile. Can they fix that painful release process to make development more sustainable and maybe more responsive? Second, there's strategy. Evolution versus revolution. Do they build on the foundation they have, or do they listen to the calls for a radical overhaul? Third, there's technology. The future of KPT. Is that investigation into this core component going to lead to a massive architectural shift? Fourth, the ecosystem. Integration first. How deep will they really commit to that difficult but necessary work of becoming tool-agnostic? And finally, there's responsiveness, the feedback loop. Can they actually implement Kieran's suggestion for a more continuous delivery model to get fixes and features to users much faster? These are the big questions on the table. And so we end with this single, powerful question that really wraps up the entire challenge. There is absolutely no doubt that the ideas behind Nephio are compelling. The project has been a huge success in sparking a vital conversation in the telco industry. It has demonstrated real, valuable thought leadership. But as we've seen throughout this whole explainer, that's only half the battle. The journey from a powerful concept to a trusted, stable, enterprise-ready product is a long and very difficult one. The community has bravely acknowledged the crisis, the debates are happening out in the open, and the work is underway. The ultimate question for R4, for R5, and for the entire future of the project remains. Nephio has proven it can lead thought, but can it lead to production?